loob sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng pera. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugo, todo sa kayod, punong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing hiding at tigil, do and buy, one big fight. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan.
Radyo Katipunan. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan. Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle.
Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atenista, sa loob sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng pera. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugo, todo sa kayod, punong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing hiding at tigil, do and buy, one big fight. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan.
Hello mga Katipuneros. This is Father Ro Atilano SJ. Listen to our serving of stories that will inspire you and keep you going. Kaya tara na at nasapin ang masarap na timpla ng buhay. Welcome po kayo sa The Parable Cafe every Tuesdays at 3:30 p.m. only here on Radyo Katipunan 87.9.
Bahala sa iyo, kaibigan ko.
Radyo Katipunan. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan. Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle.
Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atenista, sa loob sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng pera. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugo, todo sa kayod, punong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing hiding at tigil, do and buy,
refresh, renew, and reflect. Join us for an hour of music that uplifts the soul. Listen to your favorite Jesuit music ministry artists. This is JMM Radio. JMM Radio. Get your day's dose of inspirational music. Tune in to JMM Radio every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Only here on Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM.
Dearest Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve. To give and not to count the cost. To fight and not to heal the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not ask for reward. Save that of knowing I'm doing your will. I'm doing your will. Dearest Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve. To give and not to count the cost. To fight and not to heal the wounds. To toil and not to seek for rest. To labor and not ask for reward. Save that of knowing I'm doing your will. Amen.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to JMM Radio, the radio program of the Jesuit Music Ministry. Ako po si Lester Mendiola.
Join us for another hour of music and talk that uplifts the soul. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat, and welcome of course to another exciting Wednesday edition of your JMM Radio, only here on Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM. The voice of the Blue Eagle, of course, Ateneo's campus and community radio station. Of course, right now you are listening to us via 87.9 FM frequency if you're within Katipunan and Ateneo areas. You can also listen to us over online radio at zeno.fm/RK879FM. At gayon din po, ay napapanood tayo live sa ating Facebook feeds, of course, in our pages in Radyo Katipunan, Jesuit Communications, Ateneo de Manila University, and of course, your Jesuit Music Ministry. Gayon din po sa ating YouTube channel on Radyo Katipunan FM and on Twitter. Ayan.
Yes, ayan. I hope we're coming into you loud and clear. If it's your first time to watch our show this evening, please hit the like and the share button so that you'll be able to reach more people in this episode.
Yes, and we have a very special episode for you this evening, di ba, Les?
Yeah, correct. Just, kumusta ka?
Eto, Makati ang lalamunan. Makati lalamunan ko for some reason. I don't know. I'm kind of trying to prepare myself for this interview because well, anyway, to give a backgrounder for our Katipuneros, ayan, kasi nga we have a very special guest and this is imported. Imported to. Diba? Kaya medyo prepare tayo sa English, no? But of course, he's not naman he's not fully imported because of course, he's also just like us, Pinoy na Pinoy din niya at heart, syempre.
Yes.
Yun. Ayun, anyway, sige. Sorry. Okay naman ako. Bukod sa, I have like this sore throat. Yeah.
Anyway, just,
ikaw. Ikaw ba?
before we, okay naman ako, no? We opened our show with the Prayer for Generosity. It's
Yes.
actually nominated as for the best inspirational song category of the
Yes.
44th Catholic Mass Media Award. So that song is performed by Darwin Lamintigar and composed and arranged by Gino Cruz. Ayan po.
Yes.
Pakinggan po ninyo. Well, hopefully manalo tayo sa Catholic Mass Media Awards. No?
Yes. Yun. So nominated pa lang, no? So hopefully
Yes.
take home the bacon, ika nga. Diba? So, ayan,
Correct.
naghanda tayo ng mga, yung mga ganyan.
Ano ba yan?
Diba?
Idiomatic expressions.
Idiomatic expressions. Yes. Of course, if you want to listen to that song again, you can just check out, of course, our catalog, of course, on our digital music platforms worldwide. It's available on Spotify, Apple iTunes, Deezer, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music.
Yes.
Of course, just search for Jesuit Music Ministry. Or, of course, for that song, Prayer for Generosity.
Mm-hmm.
Ayan. Anyway, excited na ako, Les, kasi diba? It's been a while since we've seen our guest, of course, no? And kailan ba yung huli kong I'm trying to recall when was
it
time.
Was it in 2017 or 2018 yata?
I believe
just
so.
when I first met our guest.
And we met, of course, him in person when he visited here in Manila. And because we had we had to work with him with several projects, I if I'm not mistaken, so yun, and it's been a while since we've heard from him. That's why we're so honored to of course have him guest for the first time here in our show. And of course, just like in our tradition of featuring our friends and of course artists, and so tonight we're going to spotlight our one of our good friend and of course isang institusyon, no, 'di ba? Sa larangan
sa musika, liturgical music.
Sa liturgical music. Ayan,
yes. Okay.
Maybe you
all right,
do
so
the honors.
All right. So our guest tonight, he is a Paulist priest. He's also a composer, a theologian, and an author. He is a 2020 Distinguished Catholic Music Composer of the Year Award. It's given by the Association of Catholic Publishers. And 2018 Pastoral Musician of the Year Award by the National Association of Pastoral Musicians. Ayan. Yung ilan sa mga nilikha niya ay yung Spirit and Grace, Worthy is the Lamb. Ang pinaka-familiar ako, ito yung Ang Katawan ni Cristo. Ayan. He studied composition and piano at the Manhattan School of Music, theology at the Washington Theological Union in Liturgy, Culture, and Sociology at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Tapos meron siya mga books, Chanting on Our Behalf, that won first place sa Catholic Press Association, and Liturgy of Life, yung 2014 finalist for Excellence in Publishing Awards, also by the Association of Catholic Publishers. He is a theological consultant for United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and the co-author of Official National Pastoral Plan for Asian Pacific Catholics, Encountering Christ in harmony, and many more. He resides at St. Paul the Apostle Church in New York City, but he is now in New Jersey. And friends, please welcome our dear friend, Father Ricky Manalo, CSP. Hi, Father.
Hey, Les, and hi, Justin. Hi to both of you. God bless you both. Boy, I'm honored to be here for the first time to be chatting, and I miss you guys. I miss the Philippines. I miss everyone there.
Yes,
So
it's our pleasure
thanks for
having
inviting me.
you, Father, again. Of course, this time around, it's in our radio program, finally.
Yeah.
So, how have you been, and what have you been doing?
I'm doing very well, actually. You know, at the beginning of the what I call the zombie apocalypse back in January 2020, I moved really at the beginning, that first month. I moved from San Francisco, where I had been living for 15 years, to the Great Big Apple, New York City, so I could be closer to my mother here in New Jersey. So it was interesting to be in New York during those, and continues to be during these pandemic days. But I'm doing very well. I think for the past, I guess, year and a half, I returned pretty much to my ministry before the pandemic, in which I've been doing a lot of traveling. I travel 2 to 3 times a month somewhere around the country here in the United States, giving a lot of talks or presentations and or concerts. So I'm back to my pre-pandemic life, although it is, of course, as we know, a different landscape out there.
Right. Yeah. So, again, if we recall it, so we met at around 2017 or so, right? So,
Mhm. Yeah.
and back then it was still like, uh, you know, I mean, it's the normal life pretty much. But now
Yeah.
with after this pandemic, yeah, or well, we're still in the pandemic somehow. I don't know,
Mhm.
things have changed. How has the landscape there right now? I mean, in terms of like the church.
I think we're back to having, of course, it's been going on for a while now, maybe the past year and a half, having people come back to mass. We're not getting the same percentage as we had pre-pandemic. Maybe 20 to 30% have not returned back to mass. So we're looking at that, although that depends on our particular parish in New York City, which is a metropolitan area. We do have a lot of people coming back. We've had, now with the fifth shot or the second booster, more and more people are feeling safer per se, but also being cautious, as we look to the fall and earlier this fall and winter time. But I think in general, masses are back, but it's just the people that we're concerned about. To what extent will they return?
Right. Because less,
Did,
right, here in the Philippines, we our local conference of bishops have called on the faithful to return, no, back to Sunday
yep.
masses,
Mhm.
right?
I
Yeah,
wonder
sorry.
if they did the same in the US, Father. Did your bishops conference also issue any statement about encouraging people to go back to churches, or it differs depending on what particular local diocese you're a part of?
Yes, they did a while ago too. I'd say at least a year ago. Encouraging people to come back, if not a year and a half ago. Uh-huh. As long as, but allowing people to now. What's changed is the option of whether you want to wear a mask or not. So there are some
Mhm, mhm.
who might want to or not per se, but that remains an option for many parishes. And from what I observe, I think it's I don't know if I could give you any percentage, but it depends where you're going. The United States, we're so vast in ideologies.
Mhm, mhm.
My experience when I go more to the south, I see less people wearing masks. Of course, if I go to Orange County, California, where a lot of Asians, everyone's wearing a mask. So it really varies, to
Mhm.
how they use that here in the United States.
Mm-mm. Mm. Yeah, well, here it's a little well, yeah, it's going more lighter in terms of implementing like the mask policy, because I understand, especially with if you are in an open area,
Outdoor,
right? Or
Oh
if
yes,
you're on
yeah.
if you're outdoors,
Ah.
it's
um,
optional already.
it's already
Mhm.
optional to wear a mask. But if you're
But
still within,
people
you
still
know,
wear masks.
right.
Yes.
Oh, well, yeah,
Yeah.
correct. Regardless if you're in or
Yeah.
out. So
Right.
people here are more quote unquote conscious already, I guess. They're more
Right.
conscious in terms of how they should be, disposing themselves inside,
Well, that's the
especially in
difference.
a crowd. Mm-mm,
Isn't that the difference between Asia in general and the United States?
mm-mm,
I know that in Asia we think more communitarian. So I wear a mask
mm-mm.
because I'm concerned about the others. The United
Yes,
States is
right.
all about my individual right. So it's
Yes,
like one tool you
agree,
can't
agree.
force me. It really depends on that. But I've always admired more of that communitarian approach of
Mhm.
thinking of the other, because in
Mm-mm,
my mind that seems to be more humane, or if not Christian.
mm-mm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anyway, Father, we'd like to talk about your ministry
Sure.
tonight. So maybe we'd like to start with this question. You've been a composer for many years. When did you start composing, and what was it like during your younger years? Were you part of a choir?
Mm,
Did that influence you to become a pastoral musician?
sure. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm feeling old. Oh, I think it goes back to of course, being Filipino here in the United States, we had a very religious family with my mother and gathering her 6 children every night to pray the rosary 365 days a year. So there was a natural then extension that when I went into being a musician as well, that somehow I would utilize my music in ministry. And that's what happened back when I was still studying music at Manhattan School of Music and still living at home. I remember they asked that they needed a pianist and music director to help the grade schoolers learn do a performance of the musical Godspell. And so I got involved in the church that way, and that led to music ministry in my parish and singing in a choir. And that eventually then also led to the idea of becoming a priest and joining a religious community. So as early back, music ministry has always been a part of my life. I remembered also that while I was studying music in New York, because I began to learn the vocabulary better, whenever I returned to Sunday Mass, I began to evaluate the music ministers in my hometown parish, saying, gee, I wonder whether the cantor could do this better in order to make people sing more, or whether the keyboardist could do that. So I began to juxtapose what I was learning with my own experience in the parish. And then I remember I writing this 5-page report. I was maybe I don't know, maybe 17, 18 years old. And I gave it to my parish priest saying, this is what we can do better in order to have, people participate more fully, conscious and actively. And then that's when I knew, I really do have this passion for liturgical music.
Mm-hmm. Father, I'm curious because of course, you're born from Filipino parents, but you're born and raised in the States. How was it like in terms of your influences in doing music, or like how did you discover, or I'm not sure how it
Yeah.
should be like your Asian roots somehow to
Yes.
show up in your craft, or
Yeah.
if I mean in terms of like perhaps the general influences that you have.
Well, again, being Filipino American, as we all know, gosh, Filipinos, I feel like we're inherently genetically musical.
Musical,
So,
right? Yes. Mm-hmm.
so like all of my siblings had to learn how to play the piano. My mother and father did. My father believed that he was a good composer in some ways, whatever was. So that was always a part of our lives per se. And I think it also influenced me on another level. growing up Filipino American, there was this double identity struggle I had here in the United States because
Yeah.
Filipino,
Mhm.
I was not part of the majority dominant culture. And so domestically, I was a Filipino, but socially, outside of my home, I was also American, and I catered more to the larger, as far as my cultural sensibilities, to the wider dominant European American culture.
Mhm.
So what do I mean by this? Is that in many ways, I also did not, I also did not understand that my Asian Filipino culture as much, or it was always in dialogue with the wider,
With the
integration
Western,
that I wanted to do.
right?
And what happened was maybe in the maybe around the early 90s, I began to retrieve that Asian heritage per se. And that came out in so many different ways. Later on, when I'm a little bit more, grounded in my own belief, I go, you know what? I want to understand more of that part that was always somehow socially always in competition with the other cultures, and that manifested with me having learning and having a greater passion of understanding Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. My grandfather was Chinese. And so when I began to learn more about Zen Buddhism for my own prayerful life, learning how to have a deeper sense of prayer and combine that with my Catholic identity, that also tapered into my music. And what emerged in the early 90s was a song which I eventually wrote. It became Many and Great, in which I used an East Asian pentatonic scale per se. And I wanted, I said to myself, we have, how can I introduce Asian American liturgical music in the United States? Because already by that time you had Hispanic composers like Bob, Eliezer Cortez, Jaime Cortez, Bob Hurd, Pondivita. What about Asian Americans? And so I thought the pentatonic scale was one way to do that. And so in some ways, that wanted it being composed and it wanted it being published. And then every now and then, I would always bring in that particular Asian sensibility to my music, per se.
Wow,
And then,
wow.
of course, and then, as you know, that eventually also led to bringing in Filipino American and Filipino music from Manila to more mainstream published forms here in the United States,
Right.
and that was my first relationship with Jesuit music back in the 90s, which led to Gentle Strength, the collection, and
Right,
Katipunan
right.
Crystal.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned that, now that we wanted to also know pretty much, the difference of how liturgical music is composed and used, there in the US versus here in the Philippines, because there's really like a lot of, well, of course, obviously for obvious reasons, the structure is different, of course, in terms of melody, tempo, etc. But at the same time, of course, in terms of like copyright and what do you
How
call
it's
it,
distributed.
distribution, right? There's like a big difference. I guess just pretty much like the difference of
Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a great question. And of course, I could, there are 12 areas to that
Yeah.
one question you guys asked. Copyright. And then if there's something, then we can go from there. So as far as copyright, absolutely, there is a marked difference, not only with between the Philippines and the United States, but I think the United States and in general, other countries.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure in Europe, they look at copyright similarly, in some ways to the United States. But in general, yeah, we see copyright here. First of all, the United States is very much, for better and for worse, has a very, when it comes to the production of what I would call the sociology of music, how we utilize and market and produce music here, it very much links up and connects to the wider approach to how we look at popular music here. So part of it is marketing, part of it is we have competitions between publishing companies. So when it comes to consumerism, when it comes to marketing, but also, on the flip side, the idea of providing, having the resources to be able to produce so many CDs or collections, all of that is going to also then connect to the idea of copyright, safeguarding the rights per se of, and allowing the composers here who use their music actually as a generous way of life. So they need music here, just like anything else in market or in the arts, for musicians as well. There's this need to actually provide them the economic means to make it a living per se. So music directors, so in other words, and that will lead to very legalistic approaches, right? The idea, even if you're a cantor for for a mass, or if it's part-time, or a music director or a guitar, that in some ways you're paid, because that might be your actual, you might be raising a family, you might be this might be your sustenance. That trickles over to composers. When it comes to our music, we also want to safeguard it, make sure that people don't use it without their permission, or that they just don't, or they don't plagiarize it, and things like that. So we have a long history. I think there are, again, pluses and minuses to that, because everywhere I go, and I travel the world too, there was a sense that, music is, that's a volunteer. And for many musicians too, if you're part of a choir, it might be volunteer. If you're an instrumentalist, you might not get paid at all. But if you take on more of a leadership role, or a composing, or a creator role, there is this idea of economic sustainability, I'd say.
Right.
And that's where copyright comes in to safeguard that. What's your now? This is a great question. I'd love to throw it back to you both, even though I know some thoughts from my experiences. But how would you answer that question?
Well, yeah. Sorry, Les. I guess Lester would have his thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I think it's just it's been difficult, Father.
It's hard.
In terms
I
of
mean, it's
in
practically
terms
hard.
of
really.
copyright in the Philippines, because it's not very much practiced. Like when I came on board as director for the Jesuit Music Ministry, there are thousands of scores, even songbooks that are uploaded on the internet. So I needed to request to have it taken down, things like that, and educate people about copyright. There are agencies like the Intellectual Property of the Philippines and the Philippine Choral Director Association as well, and other organizations that are helping educate our musicians and the consumers here in the Philippines. I think we've improved a lot, but we have a long way to go.
Right.
But it makes me happy every time I see an email asking for approval that they'd like to use this music in their in a concert or something like that. So every time I receive those emails, I thank them for asking for permission that they will use music, and then I would say that there's a very big improvement for the past 5 years that I've been involved in the ministry. What else? But our musicians here do not get paid. Sometimes they do if there's a full-time musician in the parish, but very, very seldom, right? Just yeah. In JMM we don't pay our priests composers. Our lay partners, we give them some honorarium, but I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, where the difference of the rate that they're getting if they're going to be a professional musician is different than that of the rate that they're getting, because the ministry that we are in is we have a long way to go in terms of um, revenues, royalties, and things like that. So,
Yeah.
but I think we're very much improving.
Right.
Good.
I want to add to that because there's also this certain understanding that because this is a ministry we're doing,
Right.
uh, the commercial part is somehow disregarded in most cases because again they understand that it's like you're giving this as a gift like
Mhm.
to the church to enrich our
Right.
music uh for that for people to use our music more
Mhm.
in this in masses but then again of course the sustainability of and also the livelihood of the person who's doing
Right.
the music. I mean, yes, I mean our priests they do compose but then again of course, right? I mean, where would
But
they get their like, for example, for materials and so they would still be needing at least aid
mhm.
for that, right? So
There might
As
be
much as
some,
possible, we want to professionalize
yes.
everything,
Yeah.
right?
right,
So,
correct,
Yeah, there's something where in the middle, right? Where
right.
certainly I'm sure for professional church musicians, I'm glad you brought that term in, or even professional church composers, for them it is a ministry too,
True,
right?
true.
mhm,
And likewise, there are other people who are, not every choir member, instrumentalist also gets paid in the United States, because that, person won't be
Yeah.
able to afford that per se.
Hmm.
But there was some in the middle where I know many parishes where they'll actually hire. I don't know if this goes on in the Philippines, but they'll hire professional singers, like maybe two sopranos, two tenors, two altos, and two bass. They'll get paid to sing with the regular church choir, so they are part of the choir, but
mhm,
that's so they can
mhm,
sustain the quality, and the notes and all, and the
Mm.
performative aspects of a church. So we're in the middle. They're not all volunteers, is my point, but it's
mhm,
somewhere
mhm.
in this middle ground that is probably what we need to look at. Yeah.
All right, interesting. Anyway, of course, we want to do a lengthy discussion on that, but it's we
Sure.
all want to go more back to of course you, Father. Um, tell us more about like who's your favorite collaborator, or of course you've done a lot of collaborations in the past. Who's your favorite collaborator when it comes to composing music?
Gee, I've done collaborate. It was only maybe two collections, CDs ago, that was in which it was all focused on collaborations, in which I would compose with another composer.
Mhm.
People like Suzanne Tulin, who wrote "I Am the Bread of Life," or Dan Schutte, "Here I Am, Lord."
Mhm.
Yes.
Another one, Sarah Hart, a very popular now. Uh, anyway, a contemporary Christian composer. I'd say in the end, Jerry Chirzano, he's been always my collaborator since the beginning, because we both went to Manhattan School of Music back in the 80s, even before I had my calling to be a priest. And so,
Mhm.
we started in this ministry back then, and I've always looked to him because he could run circles around me when it comes to arrangement and knowing about the rules of four-part harmony, which I kind of hold on to strongly here probably more than other composers do. And I'm not saying it's better or worse, but Jerry's always been sort of my partner in that sense. He's arranged at least a third of my music, and I always love to get feedback from him. Another person I like to hold out is Rufino Zaragoza, whom the Franciscan brother who does a lot of work and ministry with intercultural context, with particularly Vietnamese Catholics. Um, but he's sort of like my cultural partner in this, because I have a great interest in multicultural, intercultural music. And so when it comes to suggestions or opinions about those aspects, I always turn to Rufino and ask him, "What do you think?" So he's my thinking partner in that.
He's supposed to visit us last May, I think, Father, but
Yeah.
he changed his plan. So hopefully, both of you will be able to visit us soon.
Yeah. Well, I might be there
Mm.
next November, so I'll let you know.
Okay. Right. Father, there's a question here about liturgy. All right. So what can you say about the renewed interest of young people to traditional liturgy and traditional sacred music? I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it's the same
Yes.
experience you have in the US, but here in the Philippines, there's a growing, you know, interest in
I didn't know that.
traditional liturgical
Yes.
music.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're just
Yeah.
big, you know, are if they're just very vocal on social media. That's why
Mhm.
it seems that there are many. But
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
we've noticed that there's a renewed interest in traditional.
There's a
Right.
resurgence of interest.
Aha.
So I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
sure if that's also the same with, in that part of the world.
It is very much the same, and it's interesting to hear that that's also going on in the Philippines. For here, it's been going on for a while. I'll say, maybe the last Berkeley, California, there was this there's one of the professors who now I'm probably going to forget, Anne Swidler, and I took her course. But she's a famous sociologist in the United States, and she talks about this. She talks about this toolbox, the toolkit that I have. Let's say a toolbox, and I put I put cultural tool things there that are maybe familiar or that resonate with my way of making sense of the world. So there might be something about my Filipino culture, the way we eat, the way we sing, that might be there. But then I also might put a New York cultural toolbox of, speaking my mind, whatever it may be, or being individualistic, or being very, be very, very driven and directed, let's say, whatever those stereotypes, whether they are or not, I have toolbox there. So having said this, partly what's been going on is maybe the past 20 years, even more, 20, 30 years, there's a response to what's going on in the world. Some people would say it's a very postmodern world. There's a rise of what we call the nuns, NONES, people who are no longer being affiliated to the church, right? What they're doing, they're responding by going into their toolbox and saying, I don't believe in institutional church anymore. I'm fed up, or the sexual abuse crisis that's been going on. I want to leave the church, per se. So they go into their toolbox and they go, oh, it's not that I'm not religious or spiritual. I'm going to go in other aspects. I might go into the internet. I might explore other religious identities. I might do all of these things. That's what's comfortable for them. I want to think, and this is getting back to your question now, that as much as that's going on with the nuns, NONES, and more disaffiliation, you also have the counterpart of that. People are responding to this postmodern world. Look at the world; it's crazy now. There are people who are no longer being affiliated. I don't like the contemporary music. So they're going back into the toolbox, and they're saying, "Oh, look at this tradition we used to have in the Catholic Church. You had Gregorian chant, or you had pre-Vatican II when there was Latin and people respected, or there was a sense of silence, whatever it was, or that sense of reverence again towards the Eucharist." So in their toolbox, they're pulling out these forms from the past, even though they never lived before Vatican II. I don't really know about that period, but they're saying if this is within the church repertoire of options, then they're kind of choosing this way of life to respond to the postmodern context around them. I don't know. I hope that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, maybe it's really because of the fact that it's
Mhm.
there anyway, and a lot of people would tend to somehow explore, and yes, and they find it somehow for some, they benefit from the sacredness of the silence that, or that's
Yep.
the sacredness of the of that it brings, right? So that sense of sacredness. So that
There was a
brings
lot of noise about when the Pope issued the motu proprio for
right.
the
Mm.
TLM
Yeah,
um a couple of months ago, I think. So
yeah,
Mm-mm.
yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Because where the Pope is coming, Pope Francis is saying, well, we need unity, and we shouldn't use the one style or one form of the mass or one against the other. We shouldn't use it as a device to create like he's not saying this, but he's not using the term cultural wars per se.
Mm-hmm.
But then what's been going on, the celebrations of a 1962 mass in Latin, some leaders were using that as a tool to further divide.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
against the Vatican II reform per se. And Pope Francis is saying, well,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute. Remember Vatican II, and what came out of that is still really the overriding, the
Right.
overriding per se.
Mhm.
And we have to,
Mhm.
and in order to do this, is when we say, don't use these ideologies as a starting point to actually bring more division. You can do it, and that might be your preference per se, but that shouldn't be the norm. It's actually
Mhm.
extraordinary.
Mhm.
All right. So I got another question here about choosing music, yeah, for the
Hmm.
liturgy.
Oh,
And the question goes, there are three judgments when you choose music. Of course, there's the liturgical, pastoral, and musical. So for you, what do you think is the most important?
I think all three of them, they have to be
Mm-hmm.
seen as one. All three of those, and I'm glad to know that the one asking the question is familiar with that, because it
All
first came
right.
out of
Yeah.
music and Catholic worship, which was a U.S. bishop's a statement on music. But we have to see all three of those as being in dialogue with one another, because, for example, if you start saying, well, the liturgical theological is more important, without considering the pastoral, then how you convey that liturgical theological um, um, truism, and it might be true, I would hope it is, but how you convey that in a particular cultural context is also going to be equally important. Otherwise, it's going to go past their heads. For example, you can say, oh, here's this liturgical rule or theology that we believe that let's say that that the music should point to this particular rite, or during this season, it should be all quiet, or rather it should go with the seasonal decorum or the seasonal mood or whatever that may be. But then you go also to other cultures where how they define what is quiet, how they define what is solemn, could be vastly different than another. So while I totally agree with that, liturgical music should always, in the end, point to the liturgical season. How that is expressed, for example, well, you need the pastoral cultural, judgment to be in conversation of how you interpret those liturgical truism per se. And then, of course, that musical aspect, well, how that's going to be actually expressed, of course, that's going to be important because you can come up with the context, the pastoral context, right? You can come up with the theological, but then the actual vehicle of how that's expressed. Well, we're going to need, singers who are familiar with that cultural context.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to say they're all part of one judgment. And so you have to, if you look at the Sing to the Lord, which was a follow-up to the second follow-up actually to Music in Catholic Worship, and that came out in 2007, I believe. It says there that the three of these are actually one judgment, but you have to look at all three of these as being kind of in conversation and dialogue with one another.
Mhm.
All right. So context is very, very important. Okay, Father, here's another question. I think we're nearing the ending of our show already, but
Yeah, we're
um,
almost close to.
yes.
Mhm.
What is your dream for the pastoral music ministry of the Catholic Church? I know in the US there are a lot of formation or efforts to, say, for example, educate pastoral musicians, um, form them, make sure that they go back to their parishes to become better ministers.
Mhm.
What's your dream for the pastoral
Oh,
music ministry?
I have many. So I do, but let's say what comes to mind. Certainly, certainly that they continue to value their presence in the midst at a time when the numbers of Catholics are decreasing as far as Catholics worship coming to worship. So how my dream is how will they continue to sustain that? Also, my take here in the United States, at least, a lot of the church musicians are aging. Just like the population, at least the ones who are going and worshiping at Sunday Mass per se. So there's need of encouraging that. But tied to that also is how are we also recruiting the next generation um, and getting them excited, training them to really embrace the beautiful and worthwhile ministry of music and what that does to the liturgy. I do have a fear as I see dwindling numbers, and even as we were talking before, fewer people wanting to be music directors. I say because it's not economically sustainable for the. So, you know what I'm saying? So how do we, as a church in the United States, at least,
Mhm.
look at those issues that's going to somehow sustain and keep music ministry alive? Because we definitely, it's definitely such an important part of any liturgical celebration. Mm.
Mhm.
I can't imagine any liturgical celebration without music. As we hear in many documents, official documents, it is the norm.
Mhm.
Singing should be the norm, not speaking. so, so if it is the norm, actually, because as we know, when we sing, we pray twice, but it also gets expressive of the deeper theological meaning, going back to theological meaning, through which we express that meaning.
Mhm.
So when we, if singing and music begins to wane a bit, then then I fear that. The last thing I'd like to say connected to that is that we get away from these what I was talking about before. Get away from these cultural wars. I think there's a place for all of the liturgical music of various styles. Dot dot dot. As long as it's theologically and liturgically sound, and the text, point to what is a is theological, depth and it's correct in many ways to the articles of our faith. Then
Mhm.
various styles, whether it's a drum set or whether it's Gregorian chant, in my book, has a place. And so we have to learn how to, rather than say either or, how do we embrace all of these? There might be a time when we bring in a popular contemporary style music, but we might do the Agnus Dei during the Lamb of God,
Mhm.
or sing, all of those varies, but also explore other possibilities and other cultural voices that have not been heard. So I kind of see that as a hope that we learn how to embrace the diversity better and
Mhm.
start pitting one cultural style over the other.
Mhm.
I agree, Father. Catholic means universal, right? So
Yeah.
Mm,
Wow,
very good.
wow, Les, we've been enjoying our conversation for the past hour, but yeah, I mean, we don't have that much liberty of and time to go on with this. If we had that much time. But anyway, Father, I guess we'll go on to our final question for you. I guess we wanted to ask you for advice. to all of our aspiring church musicians out there, on how they can be successful in the ministry, in the context of this present environment that we are at.
I'd say, as far as the advice I always give all past musicians, and in some ways, what's coming to mind is the three judgments that we talked about before.
Yeah.
Ask yourself out of that: the musical, liturgical, or / theological, liturgical, the musical, and then the pastoral. And I would put their culture as well. Out of those three areas, for each pastor musician, which one do you feel needs more formation or education or catechesis? If it's more musical competency, continue to, of course, learn better musical skills. If you feel like you have that already, but you haven't really read, for example, documents that are out there, like the Constitution and the Sacred Liturgy that came out of Vatican II, or other resources, I would encourage, at least you would get, even though it may not fit completely the context in the Philippines, but the U.S. bishops here, the Sing to the Lord that came out in 2007, you might discern that, well, what about these words resonate with our experience here, and what aspects do not? And that also goes into understand the cultural, that aspect. What is it about the cultural here in the Philippines aspects that I still need to learn more about, or other cultures, that might help us. So look at those three areas and ask, what are which parts do I feel like I need more information or would benefit the other two aspects?
Wow. It's been yeah.
And not to give up hope. Not to give up hope in light of this pandemic. Again,
Yes.
Our music and our voices, I think, is what really sustains us, particularly when we do a live stream mass a lot. And in some of my studies and my interviews with people, sometimes they enjoy the music more than the other parts of the mass. So they, in today's culture, they might watch the mass, but then they might just play back musical portions of it. So their ministry is being utilized in different ways, or it might be the homily, whatever it may be. So there'll always be a place for music in all its forms.
Yeah. Amen to that. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's been a great time talking to you, Father, and it's been a great pleasure to have you with us again here. Of course, Les, it's been a while and we missed you. Hopefully, of course, we'll see you here back in the Philippines sometime soon, perhaps.
I hope so. I might be going to Hong Kong November 2023 because that was my latest music. I did a mass setting for
Oh,
Paris.
that's close.
They're going to have like a music fest there, I think, in November. So they might be inviting me there. And if I do, then I'd love to do a hop, skip away to the Philippines.
Why not? Why not?
God bless.
Thank you so much, Father. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing your time and of course getting to know you more and your music. So
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you, Father.
Right.
Yes, I just have a couple of announcements. Reminder to all composers, songwriters, and lyricists joining the National Songwriting Competition for the 5th visit of the relics of Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus. Please submit your entry on or before October 28th. Ayan po, hanggang October 28 na lang. And we're releasing a new single from Hangad. Every Friday po, we're going to release a new song coming yung sa bagong album po nila. Ang title po nitong release natin sa Friday is the a cappella version of I Sing the Mighty Power of God. And then every Friday, we're releasing a new song leading to the album launch on December. So abangan po ninyo yan.
Ayun. Once again, of course, we'd like to thank Father Ricky Manalo for
CSP
for waking up
yes
for us.
Yeah. God bless, guys. Good to see you both again.
Yes, and thank
you, Father.
Thank you, Father, and we hope to see you as well very soon and work with you again, of course, in collaboration with, of course, the Jesuit Music Ministry. And of course, maraming salamat din po sa ating mga katipuneros for joining us tonight, this 19th of October 2022. Sa ngalan po ng bumubuo ng aming programa, ang aming pong tech na si James, ang ating producers na sila Judith, Adam, Princess at ang writer ng ating episode tonight, si Chris. Ako po si Justin Pontino mula sa Radyo Katipunan.
Sa ngalan po ng aking katuwang sa Jesuit Music Ministry na si Kuya Ray Malipot, ako po si Lester Mendiola. Iwanan po namin kayo ng isang awit, ang Maria Babae sa Pagtoo, performed by Coro Vianista. Good night, everyone!
Good night!
Night.
Okay.
Rejoice, refresh, renew, and reflect. Join us for an hour of music that uplifts the soul. Listen to your favorite Jesuit Music Ministry artists. This is JMM Radio. JMM Radio. Get your day's dose of inspirational music. Tune in to JMM Radio every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Only here on Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan, down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo Katipunan, the voice of the Blue Eagle. Radyo Katipunan, news, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan, down from the hill and down to the